3 months had passed since the Kreth encounter, and Yarem stood once again before the Galactic Union Assessment Council. Her amended report glowing on the display before her, the chamber was fuller than it had been for her preliminary presentation, with representatives from dozens of species crowding the gallery to witness the final ruling on humanity's membership. Application. Yarem understood why word had spread about the Deathworld species that had turned pirates into prisoners without spilling a drop of blood, and the galaxy wanted to know what the taxonomist who had studied them would recommend. Taxonomist Yarem, Council of Reen began, his gelatinous form steady and formal. You have requested to amend your original classification recommendation. Please present your findings. Yarem took a breath. She did not technically need and activated her presentation. My original report recommended Category 7 classification for Earth, she said. This designation would have permanently barred humanity from Union membership on the grounds that their homeworld's environmental hazards make them unsuitable for integration into galactic civilization. Images from her research appeared in the display space. The apex predator registry, the persistence hunts, the wars and weapons that had shaped human evolution. I stand by my assessment of Earth itself, she continued. It is unquestionably one of the most dangerous worlds we have ever catalogued, with apex predator diversity that exceeds any other candidate planet by an order of magnitude. Murmurs rippled through the gallery. However, Yarem said, and the chamber fell silent. I no longer believe that Category 7 classification is appropriate for the species that emerged from that world. She changed the display, replacing the images of predators and weapons with footage from the Kreth encounter, with recordings of humans providing medical aid to their defeated enemies, with data from her 3 months of additional observation. I am proposing a new designation, she announced. Category 7 Cooperative. The chamber erupted. Counselor Melith's feathered crest rose sharply as she demanded quiet. And it took several minutes for order to be restored. Explain this designation, Council of Reen said when the noise had subsided. Yarem nodded and pulled up her analysis. Category 7 worlds are rare because the environmental pressures that create them typically prevent cooperative behavior from developing, she explained. Resources are too scarce, competition too fierce, and the species that survive do so by becoming solitary predators who trust nothing and no one. She highlighted data points from her research, statistics on human social behavior and pack bonding, and the strange, fierce loyalty they showed to those they considered family. Humanity defies this pattern, she said. They evolved on a Category 7 world, yes, but instead of becoming solitary predators, they became pack hunters. They learned to cooperate not despite their harsh environment but because of it. She pulled up footage of the steadfast crew working together to rescue the Kreth pirates, humans moving in coordinated silence, anticipating each other's needs without apparent communication. This is what makes them different from any Deathworld species we have previously encountered, Yarem continued. Their survival instincts are not diminished by cooperation. They are enhanced by it. A human alone is dangerous, but a group of humans working together toward a common goal is something the galaxy has never seen. Councilor Melith leaned forward, her crest still elevated but her voice thoughtful. You are suggesting we admit a species you yourself classified as extremely dangerous. I am suggesting we admit a species that has learned to channel their dangerous instincts toward protection rather than destruction. Yarem replied. She changed the display one more time, showing the final piece of evidence that had convinced her to amend her report. It was footage from the aftermath of the Kreth encounter, recorded by the survey vessel's external sensors. The steadfast medical bay was visible through a viewport, and inside, Commander Kang was personally overseeing the treatment of the Kreth, commander who had tried to kill them all. The human's face showed no hatred, no anger, no desire for revenge. only the calm focus of a predator who had already won and saw no need to prove it further. The Kreth are notorious throughout this sector, Yerem said. They have attacked hundreds of vessels and killed thousands of sentients. And yet when humans had the opportunity to destroy them, they chose mercy instead. She turned to face the council directly, her antennae raised in the Velith posture of absolute conviction. This is not the behavior of mindless predators, she said. This is the behavior of apex protectors, beings who have developed their terrifying capabilities not to dominate others, but to defend what they love. She paused, letting her words settle over the chamber. The galaxy has spent centuries maintaining peace through careful balance and mutual deterrence, she continued. But we all know that balance is fragile. We have seen what happens when the Kreth decide to raid. When rogue factions threaten established order. When species without conscience take advantage of our reluctance to fight. Her voice hardened. Humans have no such reluctance, she said. They have spent their entire existence fighting. Against their world, against each other, against every threat that evolution could produce. And they have emerged from that crucible not as conquerors, but as guardians. She pulled up her final recommendation. I propose that humanity be admitted to the Galactic Union with a special notation, she said. They are to be designated as a protective response species, called upon first when Union worlds face external threats, given authority to defend those who cannot defend themselves. The chamber was utterly silent. Then Councillor Vreen spoke, his voice carrying the weight of his long years on the council. You are asking us to give weapons to the most dangerous species we have ever encountered. No, Yerem replied. I am asking you to give purpose to beings who have always been weapons. I am asking you to point them at our enemies, instead of leaving them to wonder if we might someday become enemies. Ourselves. The vote took 3 hours. But in the end, the Council agreed humanity was admitted to the Galactic Union 2 weeks later. Yerem stood on the observation deck of Earth's new Union embassy, watching human children play in a park below. They ran and laughed and chased each other with the boundless energy of young predators learning their capabilities. And their parents watched with the patient attention of hunters, who knew exactly what their offspring might become. Dar Park appeared beside her, silent as always, scared of us still. The human asked Yerem considered the question carefully before answering below. A small child fell and scraped her knee, and immediately 3 adults converged to help, checking the injury and offering comfort with the smooth coordination of a species that had never stopped being a pack. Terrified, Yerem admitted, but also grateful. I think I understand now why your species looks at the stars and sees not danger, but possibility. Dr. Park smiled, and the expression held the same ancient fierce warmth that Yerem had seen in Commander Kang and Dong Yun and every human she had encountered since arriving. At this death world, we spent a long time being afraid of everything. In the dark, the human said. At some point, we decided to become the thing the dark is afraid of. Turns out that thing can also choose to be kind. Yerem's antennae lifted slightly, a Velith expression that humans had learned to recognize as hope. Perhaps, she said, watching the children play beneath an alien sun. That is what the galaxy needed all along. Dr. Park nodded and said nothing more. They stood together in comfortable silence, predator and prey learning to become something new, something that had never existed before in all the long history of the Galactic Union. And somewhere in the vast darkness between stars, the things that preyed on civilized space felt the first stirring of an unfamiliar emotion. Fear, because humanity had joined the galaxy and humanity protected its pack. The quantum communication link to Galactic Union headquarters was active, and Yerem stood before a panel of 7 counselors who represented species from across the civilized galaxy. Her preliminary report floated in the display space between them. and she could see from their expressions that they found her conclusions troubling. Category 7 classification. Counselor Vreen said, his gelatinous body rippling with what Urim recognized as skepticism. Taxonomist Urim, you understand what this would mean for humanity's membership application. I understand. Counselor, no species from a Category 7 world has ever achieved interstellar travel. Counselor Melith added, her feathered crest rising in agitation. The environmental pressures make cooperation impossible, resources too scarce, competition too fierce. That is precisely why I believe my classification is accurate, Urim replied. Her voice steady despite the doubts that had been growing since her dinner with the steadfast crew. Humanity has achieved what should be impossible, and that makes them more concerning. Not less. The council chamber buzzed with murmured discussions as the various representatives consulted with each other. Urim's supervisor, a Drellin named Mogan, had dismissed her initial concerns as newcomer anxiety, but she had gathered enough evidence to support her case regardless of his opinions. You are suggesting, Counselor Vreen said slowly, that we quarantine an entire species based on the diversity of their planetary predators. I am suggesting that Earth represents an evolutionary environment unprecedented in our records, Urim corrected. And the species that emerged dominant from that environment possesses capabilities we may not be prepared to integrate into the Union. She pulled up images from her research, showing the persistence hunts, the domestication of wolves, the nuclear weapons and the wars and the relentless expansion across every corner of their world. Humans are not merely survivors, she continued. They are apex predators who have adapted to compete with and overcome every threat their planet could produce. And now they wish to expand into a galaxy that has no defenses against their particular form of aggression. Counselor Melith's crest lowered thoughtfully. You make a compelling argument, taxonomist. But I notice your report lacks concrete evidence of aggressive intent toward other species. The absence of evidence is not. Urim never finished her sentence. The survey vessel's alarm screamed to life, cutting through the quantum link with harsh urgency, and she spun toward the display showing local space. 3 ships had dropped out of faster-than-light travel approximately 2,000 kilometers from their position, and their energy signatures were immediately recognizable Kreth raiders. What is happening? Counselor Vreen demanded, his form pulsing with alarm. Pirates, Urim managed, her thorax constricting with fear. Kreth hunting packs that prey on isolated vessels. The Kreth were efficient predators themselves. Reptilian beings who had never fully joined galactic civilization and instead lurked in the spaces between established routes, taking what they wanted from anyone too weak to stop them. The survey vessel had no weapons. The Velith crew had not fought a war in 6,000 years. They were going to die here. Urim realized, killed by raiders while the Galactic Union Council watched helplessly through a quantum link. Then Commander Kang's voice came through the communication system, calm and cold and somehow more terrifying than the Kreth ships on the display survey vessel. This is the Steadfast. Stay behind us and do not deviate from your current position. We will handle this. Urim watched in disbelief as the human diplomatic ship moved to intercept, placing itself directly between the Kreth raiders and the defenseless survey vessel. They cannot be serious, Mogan said, his voice high with panic. The Steadfast is a diplomatic vessel, not a warship. It is a human vessel, Urim replied quietly. And humans do not know how to be anything other than what they are. The Kreth pack spread into attack formation. 3 predators circling their prey with the confident movements of hunters who expected easy pickings. They had done this many times before. They had never done it against humans. The Steadfast did not charge or flee or try to negotiate. It simply began to move, adjusting its position with small, precise corrections. that seemed almost lazy compared to the aggressive maneuvering of the Kreth. "What are they doing?" Counselor Melith asked. Yerim understood with a sudden chill that ran through her exoskeleton. "They are herding them," she said. "The same way their ancestors herded prey across continents. The same way wolves drive deer toward a kill zone." The Kreth commander apparently realized what was happening, because the raider ships suddenly broke formation and attempted to scatter. But the Steadfast had already cut off their escape routes, positioning itself with the patience of a species that had spent millions of years perfecting the art of pursuit. One by one, the Kreth ships found themselves boxed in, unable to run without presenting their vulnerable engines to the human vessels' weapons. Kreth vessels. "This is Commander Jihai Kang of the Earth diplomatic ship Steadfast." The commander's voice came through the open channel. "You have two options: surrender immediately and face justice for your piracy, or attempt to flee and discover exactly how fast my gunners can remove your propulsion systems." There was a long moment of silence on all channels. Then the Kreth commander responded, his voice carrying the grudging respect of one predator acknowledging another. "We surrender. Human, we know when we are outmatched." Yerim stared at the tactical display, trying to process what she had just witnessed. The Kreth were feared across 3 sectors. Raiders who had terrorized shipping lanes for generations, and they had surrendered to a single human ship without a shot being fired. "Taxonomist Yerim," Counselor Vreen said, his voice strange. "I believe we require additional information before ruling on your classification." Recommendation. Yerim turned back to the quantum link, where the council members were watching the aftermath of the encounter with expressions she could not fully read. "Of course, Counselor, what we just observed," the counselor continued, "was not mindless aggression. It was calculated, precise, and ultimately bloodless. Do you believe this represents typical human behavior?" Yerim thought about Commander Kang and her story about the bear, about Dong Yun, his 72-hour survival situation, about Dr. Park swimming in waters filled with sharks. She thought about persistence, hunting, and wolf domestication, and the long bloody history of a species that had learned to survive everything their world could throw at them. "I believe," she said slowly, "that humans are exactly as dangerous as my report suggests. But I am no longer certain that danger is something to fear." "Explain." Yerim looked at the display, where the Steadfast was now moving to assist the disabled Kreth vessels, towing them towards safe harbor rather than leaving them to drift. "They could have destroyed those ships," she said. "Every instinct that makes them successful predators would have encouraged them to eliminate the threat permanently. But instead, they chose to show mercy. Mercy can be weakness," Counselor Melith observed, "or it can be strength," Yerim replied. "The kind of strength that comes from being so confident in your own abilities that you do not need to prove them through destruction." The council chamber fell silent as her words hung in the quantum-linked space between them. Through the viewport of the survey vessel, Yerim watched the Steadfast crew begin rescue operations. Human figures in environmental suits moving through the void to help the same pirates who had tried to kill them minutes before she had come here to classify a species. She had discovered something that defied all her categories, and now she had to decide what to do about it. The human diplomatic vessel Steadfast hung in space beside the Vela survey ship, and Yerim found herself walking its corridors with the uncomfortable awareness that she was surrounded by apex predators. Park had arranged for her to access the ship's cultural archive, a vast database containing humanity's recorded history, and had also secured an invitation to dinner with the vessel's senior crew. Yerim was not certain which prospect frightened her more. The cultural archive was housed in a small chamber near the ship's center, and Yerim settled herself at the viewing terminal with the careful movements of someone expecting an ambush. "Where would you like to begin?" Dr. Park asked, taking a seat beside her. "The beginning," Yerem replied. Show me how humanity survived long enough to become what you are. What followed was 4 hours of footage, documents, and reconstructions that rewrote everything Yerem thought she knew about sapient evolution. She watched humans hunting mammoths, creatures that stood 4 meters tall and weighed several thousand kilograms. Using nothing but sharpened sticks and coordinated strategy, the humans did not overpower these giants. They exhausted them. Yerem learned about something called persistence hunting, a technique where humans would chase prey across vast distances, not to catch it immediately, but to keep it moving until its body simply gave out. Other predators relied on speed or strength, or venom. Humans relied on endurance. They could run for hours in heat that would kill most other species, sweating to regulate their temperature while their prey overheated and collapsed. Your ancestors chased animals to death, Yerem said, her voice hollow, across continents for days, until the animals simply died from exhaustion. It was an effective strategy. Dr. Park acknowledged. It is horrifying. The human shrugged, and Yerem noticed how the small movement highlighted the smooth rotation of her shoulder joint, designed by millions of years of evolution, specifically for throwing objects with deadly accuracy. We did what we needed to survive, Dr. Park said. The archive continued, showing humanity spreading across their world, adapting to every environment from frozen wastelands to burning deserts, consuming and competing and conquering, until there was no corner of Earth that did not know the footsteps of humans. But the truly disturbing content came when Yerem examined how humans treated each other. Wars that killed millions, weapons that could level cities in seconds, ideological conflicts that spanned generations and left scars still visible in their culture today. Your species nearly destroyed itself, Yerem observed, watching footage of something called a nuclear test, a pillar of fire and death that rose into the sky like a warning from some angry god. Several times, Dr. Park agreed. We came very close on more than one occasion. Yet you did not. No, we did not. Yerem turned to look at the human, really look at her, trying to understand how a species capable of such destruction could also be capable of sitting calmly in a room discussing their own near extinction. Why? She asked. What stopped you? Dr. Park was quiet for a long moment before answering. We found things worth protecting more than we wanted to destroy each other. The answer was too simple. Yerem thought, too clean for the bloody history she had just witnessed. But she filed it away for later consideration as they made their way to the dining hall. The senior crew of the Steadfast were already gathered around a large table when they arrived, and Yerem felt her antennae press flat as she took in the collection of humans who rose to greet her. Commander Jihei Kang was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that seemed to evaluate everything they saw with quiet intensity. Chief Engineer Dong Yoon was a broad-shouldered man whose arms bore scars that Yerem could not stop staring at. The ship's doctor, Unji, had a gentle smile that somehow made her more frightening rather than less, because Yerem could not understand how a species this dangerous could produce expressions of such warmth. Welcome aboard the Steadfast, Commander Kang said, gesturing for Yerem to take a seat. Dr. Park tells us you have been learning about our history. I have, Yerem managed, settling onto the specially designed chair that accommodated her 6 legs. It has been educational. The commander laughed, a sound that Yerem's translator rendered as genuine amusement. That is one way to describe it. The meal that followed was strange and uncomfortable, and somehow also enlightening in ways Yerem had not expected. The humans ate foods that would be toxic to most species in the Galactic Union. Spices and fermented substances, and something called caffeine that apparently helped them stay alert but could cause cardiac arrest in Velith. They talked and laughed and told stories. And Yerem found herself drawn into their conversation despite her determination to remain professionally detached. "You want to hear something funny?" Commander Kang said, leaning back in her chair with the easy confidence of someone who had never encountered a situation she could not handle. "When I was 12 years old, I met a bear." The other humans groaned and smiled. Clearly familiar with this story. "A bear," Yerem repeated, pulling up the registry entry on her personal display. "You mean Ursus arctos, a creature that can weigh 700 kilograms and has been known to decapitate prey with a single blow." "That is the one," the commander confirmed. "I was hiking with my father in the mountains, and we came around a corner and there it was. Maybe 20 meters away?" Yerem's thorax constricted. "What did you do?" "We stood very still and spoke in calm voices until it lost interest and wandered away," Commander Kang said. "My father said it was the most terrifying 3 minutes of his life. But honestly, I just remember thinking how beautiful it was." "Beautiful." Yerem's translator buzzed with the effort of processing her disbelief. "You found an apex predator beautiful. Most dangerous things are," the commander said simply. Chief Engineer Dong Yun laughed and rolled up his sleeve, revealing the scars Yerem had noticed earlier. "You want to see something interesting," he said, pointing to a long mark that ran from his elbow to his wrist. "I got this from a rock. I was hiking alone and fell off a cliff," he explained. "Broke my arm in 2 places, cracked 3 ribs, and had to walk 40 kilometers to find help. You survived a 72-hour survival situation with multiple broken bones," Yerem said, checking the incident report that Dr. Park had included in her briefing materials. "And you describe it as a minor hiking accident." The humans around the table exchanged looks, but Yerem could not interpret. "What would you call it?" Dong Yun asked. Yerem did not have an answer on her homeworld. Such an incident would be a catastrophic trauma that required years of recovery and treatment. But this human had apparently returned to active duty within months and considered the experience a good story for dinner parties. "I am beginning to understand," Yerem said slowly, "why your species has survived so long on such a dangerous world." "Oh," Commander Kang leaned forward, genuine curiosity in her eyes. "What have you figured out?" "You do not consider any of this unusual," Yerem replied. "The apex predators, the environmental hazards, the constant threat of death from countless sources. This is simply normal to you, and because it is normal, you have developed a tolerance for danger that no other species I have encountered possesses." The commander smiled, and the expression contained something ancient and fierce and utterly terrifying. "We stopped being afraid of the dark a long time ago." Taxonomist Yerem, what made you stop? Commander Kang glanced at her crew, at the humans who had survived their death world and reached for the stars, and then looked back at Yerem with eyes that held the weight of her entire species bloody. "Beautiful history. We found things worth protecting together," she said. "And once we found them, we decided that nothing in the universe would be allowed to threaten what we love." Yerem's antennae lifted slightly, an involuntary response to the intensity in the human's voice. "What things?" she asked. Commander Kang gestured toward the viewport, toward the endless darkness studded with stars. "Everything out here that might need us," she said. "Everything out here that might someday become family." Yerem looked at the stars and felt something shift in her understanding of the species she had come to evaluate. They were not just survivors. They were not just predators. They were protectors who had learned their skills in the hardest school the universe could provide, and now they wanted to join the Galactic Union. Yerem was no longer certain that was a bad thing. Yerem had not slept in 37 hours. This was unusual for a Velith, whose species required regular rest cycles to maintain cognitive function. But every time she closed her compound eyes, she saw teeth and claws and venom and death. The apex predator registry remained open on her workstation, and she had made it only halfway through the 417 entries. Each one seemed worse than the last. She had discovered something called a cone snail, a creature so small it could fit in a human's palm, yet it possessed venom potent enough to kill 20 adults, and for which no antidote existed. She had learned about army ants, insects not unlike her own species in some ways, that moved in columns of millions and consumed everything in their path with such efficiency that larger animals fled before them. She had read about Komodo dragons, massive lizards that did not need to kill their prey immediately, because their bite delivered bacteria, so deadly that victims simply wandered away and died slowly over days, while the dragon followed at a leisurely pace. "You have not left this chamber since yesterday," Dr. Park observed, stepping through the doorway with a container of what Yerim assumed was human food. "That cannot be healthy." "I cannot stop," Yerim admitted, her antennae twitching erratically. "Every time I think I have found the most dangerous creature on your world, I discover something worse." The human set down her food container and pulled up a seat beside Yerim's workstation. "Perhaps I can help provide some context," she offered. "The raw data can be overwhelming without understanding how these creatures fit into our ecosystem." Yerim wanted to simply submit her report and recommend that Earth be classified as a Category 7 death world and quarantined from the rest of civilized space. But something in Dr. Park's calm demeanor gave her pause. "Very well," she said. "Explain to me how your species coexists with 400 apex predators." Dr. Park smiled and activated the holographic display, bringing up a simulation of Earth's varied environments. "We do not simply coexist with them," she said. "We have spent our entire existence competing with them, learning from them, and in many cases domesticating them." "Domesticating apex predators," Yerim repeated flatly. Certain her translator had malfunctioned. "Would you like to see?" Before Yerim could respond, the simulation shifted to show a creature she had already catalogued in the registry. A wolf, gray-furred and yellow-eyed, with teeth designed for tearing flesh from bone. Then the image changed, and the wolf became something else entirely. A smaller creature with floppy ears and a wagging tail that bounded toward a human child and licked its face. "This is what we call a dog," Dr. Park explained. "Thousands of years ago, our ancestors took wolves, one of the most effective pack hunters on our planet, and turned them into companions." Yerim stared at the display in disbelief. "Your species took predators that hunted you and made them into pets." "Allies, actually," the human corrected. "They helped us hunt, guarded our settlements, and became so integrated into our society that many humans now consider them family members." This information did not comfort Yerim, if anything. It made her more alarmed. "I would like to see more of your simulations," she said, because knowledge was the only weapon she had against the growing dread in her thorax. Dr. Park obliged, and for the next several hours, Yerim watched footage that would likely haunt her for the rest of her existence. She observed a honey badger, a creature barely larger than Yerim's head, fight off a lion, one of Earth's most powerful predators, through sheer aggression and a complete disregard for its own safety. She watched army ants strip a forest floor, clean of all organic matter, while creatures 1,000 times their size fled in panic. She saw a Komodo dragon bring down prey 5 times its weight simply by biting once and then following patiently until death occurred. But the simulation that truly shattered her understanding of Earth was footage of humans swimming recreationally in waters that contained great white sharks. "Stop," Yerim said, her voice emerging as a strangled click. "Go back." Dr. Park paused the simulation. "Those humans," Yerim continued, pointing at the display with a trembling arm, "they are in the water with apex predators. Predators with 300 teeth and the ability to detect electrical signals from living bodies. Yes, Dr. Park agreed. Shark diving is a popular recreational activity. Recreational. Yerim's translators struggle to convey her horror. Your species enters the territory of one of your planet's most efficient killers for entertainment. Some of us do. Yes. Yerim pushed back from her workstation and stood on unsteady legs, her compound eyes reflecting the frozen image of a human floating mere meters from a creature that could end their existence in seconds. I need to understand something, she said slowly. The Velith have catalogued thousands of species across hundreds of worlds, and we have never encountered anything like what I am seeing here, so I must ask you directly. Dr. Park waited, her expression patient. What do humans consider to be their greatest natural predator? The human was quiet for a long moment, and when she spoke, her voice carried a weight that Yerim felt in her exoskeleton. Each other, Dr. Park said. For most of our history anyway, Yerim's antennae went completely flat. You are telling me that humans, a species capable of domesticating wolves and swimming with sharks and surviving on a world with 400 apex predators, consider other humans to be the most dangerous thing they face. That is correct. But you said for most of our history. Yerim pressed. What does that mean? What changed? Dr. Park turned to look out the viewport, where Earth hung blue and green and impossibly beautiful against the darkness of space. We found other things to be afraid of, she said, and other things to protect. We realized that the universe was very large and very unknown. And suddenly the differences between humans seemed much less important than the similarities. Yerim did not know how to respond to that. She had come here expecting to catalog a world, to fill out forms and check boxes and move on to her next assignment. But instead she had discovered something that defied every classification system the Galactic Union had ever developed. I need to see your historical records, she said finally. I need to understand how your species became this. Dr. Park nodded, and something in her eyes suggested she had been waiting for this request. I will arrange it, she said. But I suggest you prepare yourself, taxonomist Yerim, because what you have seen so far is nothing compared to what we have done. Yerim's thorax constricted with something she could only identify as fear on her homeworld. The Velith had eliminated all competing predators thousands of years ago, creating a safe and controlled environment where their species could flourish without threat. The humans had done the opposite. They had not eliminated their competitors. They had become something worse than all of them combined, and now they wanted to join the Galactic Union. Yerim returned to her workstation and began drafting a preliminary report, her arms moving mechanically while her mind raced through possibilities she had never considered before. Category 7 classification would mean humanity could never join the Union, never spread beyond their solar system, never become part of galactic civilization. But as she looked at the frozen image of a human floating beside a great white shark, completely unafraid, she wondered if any classification system could truly contain what Earth had produced. The humans were not just survivors. They were something far more terrifying. They were predators who had chosen not to prey. Yerim had catalogued 37 worlds in her career as a Galactic Union taxonomist, and not once had she felt anything close to fear during an assignment. The Velith were a practical species, insectoid in form with compound eyes that missed nothing and antennae that could detect chemical signatures from impressive distances. And Yerim considered herself particularly practical, even by Velith standards. She stood in the analysis chamber of the survey vessel, her forearms folded behind her back in the posture of professional patience, watching Earth rotate slowly on the holographic display before her. It was a pretty world, she admitted privately, with its blue oceans and green continents and swirling white clouds that reminded her of the fungi blooms on her homeworld during spawning season 3 years ago. Humanity had made first contact with the Galactic Union, and now they wanted membership, which meant someone had to assess their planet for environmental hazard classification. That someone was Yaram, taxonomist Yaram. The ship's communication system announced, "Your human liaison has arrived at docking." Bay 4. Yaram clicked her mandibles in acknowledgement and made her way through the vessel's corridors. Her 6 legs carrying her with the quick efficiency her species was known for. The human waiting for her was a female of their kind, dressed in the simple gray uniform of Earth's diplomatic corps, with dark hair pulled back from her face and eyes. That held an expression Yaram could not quite read. "I am Dr. Siawan Park," the human said, extending one of her hands in the greeting gesture Yaram had studied before accepting this assignment. Yaram reached out with her upper right arm and allowed the human to grasp it briefly, finding the warmth of the contact somewhat startling. "I am taxonomist Yaram of the Velith Assessment Division," she replied through her translator, "and I am here to complete the standard biosphere evaluation for Earth's membership application." Dr. Park nodded, and something flickered across her face that might have been amusement. "Of course," she said. "We have been expecting you, and I have been assigned to help you understand anything that might seem confusing about our world." Yaram appreciated the offer. Though she doubted she would need much assistance, a biosphere evaluation was straightforward work, requiring only patience and attention to detail, both of which she possessed in abundance. She had reviewed the preliminary data during her journey here, noting that Earth had a slightly higher oxygen content than optimal and a magnetic field that fluctuated more than she would prefer, but nothing that suggested any real complications. They walked together to the analysis chamber, where Yaram had set up her workstation with the precision her supervisors always praised. "I will begin with atmospheric composition," Yaram explained as she activated her instruments, then moved to geological stability, followed by the biological survey. "The biological survey," Dr. Park repeated, and there was that strange expression again. "That should be interesting." Yaram did not understand what the human meant by that, but she continued her work regardless, documenting oxygen levels and nitrogen ratios and trace gases until she was satisfied with her readings. The atmosphere was aggressive, she noted in her report, with oxygen content high enough to support rapid combustion and weather patterns that seemed almost deliberately violent. But it was within acceptable parameters for a Category 3 world, perhaps Category 4. "If the geological data prove troublesome, I will now require the planetary apex predator registry," Yaram announced, pulling up the request form on her display. "This is standard procedure for all candidate worlds." Dr. Park was silent for a moment. "The apex predator registry," she said slowly. "You want all of them?" "Of course," Yaram replied, confused by the question. "Typically this list contains between 5 and 15 entries, depending on the diversity of the candidate world's ecosystems." The human made a sound that Yaram's translator struggled to interpret, something between a laugh and a sigh. "I will transfer the file," Dr. Park said, "but I should warn you that it is somewhat extensive." Yaram clicked her mandibles dismissively. She had seen extensive files before, and the Velith were nothing if not thorough in their work. The data packet arrived at her workstation, and Yaram opened it with the casual confidence of someone who had done this very task dozens of times on dozens of worlds. The file began to load and load and load. Yaram's compound eyes widened as the entry scrolled past, each one accompanied by images and statistics and threat assessments that grew more alarming with every passing second. "This cannot be correct," she said, her voice emerging as a high-pitched whistle that her translator rendered flat and emotionless. "There are over 400 entries in this registry." 417. Dr. Park confirmed, and that is only the extant list, meaning species that are still alive today. Yaram's antennae pressed flat against her head in the Velith expression of extreme distress. Still alive. She repeated, "You mean there are more that are no longer living?" "Many more," the human said, and her voice was gentle now, as if she understood that Yarem needed time to process what she was seeing. "Earth has had several mass extinction events throughout its history, and apex predators have come and gone with each one." Yarem scrolled through the registry with trembling arms, her eyes catching on entries that seemed designed to haunt her dreams. There were creatures called sharks that could smell blood dissolved in water from kilometers away and had been perfecting their killing methods for longer than the Velith had existed as a species. There were pack hunters called wolves that coordinated their attacks through methods science still did not fully understand. There were ambush predators called crocodiles that could wait motionless for hours, sometimes days, until prey wandered close enough to seize. One entry showed a creature called a box jellyfish, so small that a human could hold it in one hand, yet its venom could kill a grown adult in minutes. Another displayed something called a hippopotamus, which looked almost comical with its round body and stubby legs, until Yarem read that it killed more humans per year than most of the obviously dangerous predators combined. "How?" Yarem managed to say, her translator struggling to convey the depth of her horror. "How did your species survive long enough to develop intelligence?" Dr. Park smiled, and the expression contained something Yarem had never seen on any species she had cataloged before. "We learned to be more dangerous than everything else," the human said simply. Yarem turned back to her display, her mandibles clicking in a rapid pattern that indicated a mind struggling to maintain composure. She scrolled to an entry for something called Crocodilus porosus, the saltwater crocodile, and read that it had remained virtually unchanged for millions of years because evolution had already made it perfect for killing. The creature could grow to 7 meters in length and weigh over 1,000 kilograms, and it hunted by lurking beneath the water's surface with only its eyes visible, waiting for prey to come close before exploding upward with enough force to drag large mammals to their deaths. The survival statistics indicated that humans who found themselves in the water with these creatures had approximately a 12% chance of escaping unharmed. Yarem slowly turned toward Dr. Park, her compound eyes reflecting the human's calm face in hundreds of tiny images. "How many of these?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can kill a Velith." Dr. Park considered the question with what appeared to be genuine thoughtfulness. "Honestly," she said, "probably most of them." Yarem's legs buckled slightly beneath her, and she gripped the edge of her workstation for support. She had thought this assignment would be routine. She had been very, very wrong.